Hello everyone and welcome back to the second lap guide for the Radical Academy Esports series for round 3 of the league at Gilles Villeneuve. This time round I am using a replay so I can have my overlays up on the screen and you can see my exact braking graph and the exact inputs I am using. So yeah, same as last time, going to do the hot lap and then into the lap guide. So let's jump right into the hot lap. Alright, so onto the lap guide. Heading into turn 1, you are coming from a right-hand corner, so you kind of want to stay a bit more to the left-hand side, not hugging the right, just because you want to align yourself as best as possible with the white line on entry. Braking just as this turns into grass here, or just before the grass ends on the right, getting as close to the edge of the track as possible, up to around 85% max pressure. Then I'm turning in just as it turns into grass on the right hand side, and then trailing into the corner very cautiously because it is a fast corner, fairly easy to lose the rear end, so just being cautious on your downshifts and how you trail. Clipping this apex curbing there just ever so slightly, getting your left hand side tires barely over the raised part of it there. And then I'm thinking ahead into turn 2. I want to be as close to the middle of the track as possible so I don't compromise my entry. Being in the middle allows me to get a good enough turn in to carry a good amount of speed and then get good power out of the corner. I don't really need to be all the way to the left because that would mean I would be super slow through turn 1. So I found being middle of the track was pretty decent. Getting back on power as well, just as I passed the apex curbing. Just wanted to get a little bit of a speed boost out of that corner. Try and carry as much speed in between these two corners as possible. Braking just before this color change in the asphalt, up to around 50%. Threshold braking as I am going in a straight line, and then once I start turning in, trailing off the brakes. Down into first gear, I found going down into first gave me a bit more engine braking. Not carrying too much brakes mid-corner. Didn't want to overslow and then maybe even get some oversteer, so just was being a bit cautious. Was coasting just a bit and then got back on power and upshifted to second very quickly. It is easy to lose the rear in this car. A lot of power, so I short shifted to second for the exit of turn 2. I also tried to open up my steering as fast as possible so I could get the power down to 100%. I didn't run all the way out wide to the curbing on the left here, just because I was up to 100% throttle and didn't really need to use the extra track. I found that it was kind of just a bit slower to use that extra track, making the track longer. But usually for entries to corners, you want to use all the track, not all the time on exits, just like this one. So heading into turn 3, I used this blue board on the right as my braking marker. If I go into cockpit cam, as it passes the right hand side of my monitor, I'm on the brakes up to around 70%, and then turning in just as I pass the one board on the left here, getting as close as possible to the white line on the left. I had about half a tire's width more that I could have gone. So just making sure you are aligned as close as possible to the grass on the left there. Using a lot of curb for this corner, not going all the way over to the little bubbled area or whatever you want to call this, like the AstroTurf. Just getting your right hand side tires over the sausage bit, the smooth round bit there, and then getting back on power just before you go over the curb to try and raise the fronts. It's a good little hack that you can use for any curb really, because if you think about it, when you get back on power, it lifts the fronts. So if you lift the front tires before getting onto a curb, it'll lessen the impact and keep the car a bit more balanced. So got back on power in third gear just before getting onto the curbing there, and then I tried to open up my steering as fast as possible to make as much of a straight line through the corners as possible, and then turning to the left quickly and lifting off ever so slightly, cutting the grass on the left here. Not too much. I found that the car did bottom out if you cut it too much, and if you get half the car over the left hand side of the curb, so into the grass, then you would get 1x. So just cutting as much as possible without bottoming out, and then getting back to 100% power in third gear, not short shifting for this corner, running all the way out wide, getting as close as possible to that wall there. I had a couple tires widths that I could have used, so just making sure that you are running out as wide as possible while carrying the most amount of speed through those two corners. This next corner, I am getting my left hand side tires all the way over to the grass for this little curbing bit here, and then I am turning in just as the curbing ends here, making sure I'm getting as close as possible to this wall on the right. Cutting this white line does not give you a 1x, and the reason I turn in early is because it is a fast, flat right-hander, so you want to try and take it flat because it is possible, and this car does get a lot of understeer at high-speed corners. Even though it does have a lot of downforce, I find that you do get a lot of understeer if you don't take the correct line. So making sure you're turning in just after the end of the red and white curbing here, and then getting as close as possible to the wall there, keeping it as tight as possible to the white line on entry. The car will naturally wash out to the middle of the track-ish, so just letting it do that. You don't want to scrub off too much speed with the wheel, but if you're in the middle of the track at the exit of that little fast kink to the right, then you should be good. Bringing the car back to the right as fast as possible. I'm using this little orange wall on the left here as my braking marker. Once it leaves my vision, then I start applying the brakes up to around 85%. And what I'm aiming for here is this little patch of open concrete. I don't go directly over it, but I want to aim to get as close as possible to it. You want to be thinking ahead to the next corner because that one leads onto a little straight, and you want to prioritize the exit that you get out of the next corner, because that will be the fastest way through this little chicane. You want to be apexing around the middle of this curbing here, getting your left hand wheels just over the raised bit of the curb onto like the smooth sausage bit, just like the previous chicane, and once again getting back on power just as you go over the curb to lift the fronts a bit, to lessen the impact of hitting the curb, and then getting to 100% quickly, just watching for oversteer, because you are in second gear, so you want to make sure your steering wheel is as straight as possible before doing so. Getting up into third gear, and then as you turn to the right, lifting off just slightly, getting on this curb a bit down to around 60% throttle, and then just feathering the throttle up until you're at 100%. Running all the way to the left onto the red and white curbing, and then onto the next chicane. I am using this grass or the 2-board as my braking marker. Getting to around max pressure as I get to the actual board, getting to around 85-90% max braking pressure, and then turning in just as the grass starts to begin here. Only down 2 gears. I found I was able to get a better exit in third gear rather than risking some wheel spin. I am clipping all of this white sausage curb here, and once again getting to around 50% throttle before hitting that. I did find it was quicker to use this white curbing here rather than just going around it and avoiding it, because I would have had to slow down just a bit more to go a bit more to the left, and that would have compromised my run onto the next corner. But yeah, third gear, clipping that, and then for this one, getting as close as possible to the white curb there. It is safe to take. For this lap, I just didn't take it. I did do another lap that some of you might have seen in my hot lap video where I cut both of the curbs. This lap that I ended up doing a day later, and it ended up being half a tenth quicker, so I went with using the quicker one. But yeah, you can take both if you really need to, and just being very cautious when you're getting back on throttle because you are still turning the wheel. So you just want to go very, very slowly until the wheel is fairly straight. Did get a bit of oversteer, but it didn't slow me down. Getting as close as possible to the wall on the right there. And then heading into the hairpin. This corner you really want to think about the exit. That is the main thing you want to prioritize, along with maximizing your braking. I'm using the beginning of the grass here as my braking reference. That is when I start applying the brakes, and trying to align myself as close as possible to the grass on the left. You want to try and align yourself as close as possible to the grass on the left here, as that will open up the hairpin as much as possible, making the radius bigger, allowing you to carry more speed. This corner I was able to hit just under 100% without locking the tires, carrying a lot of brakes all the way deep into the corner and then down into first gear for this corner. Then I start trailing off a lot more once I start turning in. I start turning in ever so slightly after the color change in the track here. Start turning in kind of slowly, and then once I start trailing the brakes a lot more, I turn the wheel a bit quicker. Main thing to focus on for this corner is carrying as much speed as possible while apexing it. And you can see I actually did miss the apex here. And the reason why I did that is to not make it as tight as it needs to be. So I was just taking a wider arc through the corner, allowing me to carry a bit more speed. Because if you think about it, if I was a bit further to the right, it means I would have had to have a bit more steering angle and slow the car down just that little bit more. So aiming to be around half a car's width to the left of the curbing here, getting back on power as soon as possible, and just being super cautious as you are in first gear. Back into second as you reach 100%. Don't really want to short shift for this corner because the car will just bog down, so just being super cautious in first gear will be your best bet. Heading into the final chicane where the Wall of Champions is, getting as close as possible to the grass here on the left. My braking marker is about halfway in between the 2 and the 3 board, and I'm hitting around 95% brakes, just under that. You can afford to hit 100% brakes here, but making sure you're not holding them for too long, because as the speed goes down, so does the downforce. And when the downforce goes down, you cannot brake that hard. So just making sure you do start trailing off after hitting max braking pressure, just ever so slightly. And then once you start turning in, that is when you want to start trailing off even more. Using the 1 board as my turn-in marker. Just after I pass that, I start turning in, aiming for this white curb on the right here. Just like a few corners ago, you want to get back on power just before hitting it. Trailing 3-4% brakes all the way until getting back on power, and then jumping that one and avoiding the next one, because I did find it was quicker to not hit that, and you just want to focus on getting back to 100% power as much as possible. So avoiding that curb and keeping the car balanced was the fastest way through this corner, and being super cautious on exit as you don't want to hit this wall. That will end your race, and kind of aiming for this green bit on the exit here, using all the track there, all the way to the line, and that is a lap in the SR10 at Montreal. Good luck in the race, and I'll see you for round 4.